we actually shift our affection from the Creator to the created. I wonder what this journey would look like if God's voice was the loudest in my ears and the realest of all my realities. Think about that for a minute. Hello and welcome to the Thriving Community. My name is Joy, here to bring you Bible-based insights and inspirations to help you thrive. This last few weeks, I've been exploring how God uses circumstances when we are out of move to make His move. That is how God uses those times when we have come against the wall and despite our best efforts, we're just not able to move forward. And He uses those times, those circumstances to align us to His purpose so that we can continue to move forward, now aligned to His will and His design for our lives. 2 weeks ago, I talked about Paul, and last week, I talked about Peter and how God did this in their lives. If you missed those posts, I've included their links in this video description, so be sure to check them out. This week, I am going to continue our conversation on Peter. Last week, I referenced a Bible passage in the book of Luke chapter 5. This passage essentially describes how at the moment when Peter was out of move, Jesus steps into the scene and invites him to join his ministry. It describes how Peter's relationship with Jesus began. And so today, I am going to take you to another passage. Now, this is further along in their relationship. In this passage, you will also find Peter with Jesus yet again on a lake. So let's read from the book of Matthew, chapter 14, from verse 22. I'm going to read directly from the text. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "He's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. I just want to point out the last verse in this passage. When Jesus got into the boat, the wind died down. This is a very well-known passage. I'm sure you've heard it so many times in several sermons. Matter of fact, this last Sunday, my pastor actually preached on this passage. I feel like this passage is such a show of our humanity, but right next to our Christian call. See, our Christian call is a call of faith. And in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 1, the Bible describes faith as confidence in things hoped for, assurance in things that we haven't seen. So our Christian call is to respond to things that we haven't seen, whereas our human inclination is to respond to the things that we see. And that's what we see in this passage. When Peter looked out and saw Jesus, he was emboldened. He was doing what Jesus was doing. First of all, I think that it's bravery to step out of the boat. But I also think it takes such a courage to even ask to be called to step out on the boat and walk on water. Who does that? So for him to even imagine such a scenario where God will call him out to walk on water to me is mind blowing. But that's what happens when your sight is focused on Jesus. You can see there is no impossibility, because with Jesus there is no impossibility. And so when his focus was on Jesus, he was doing what he saw Jesus doing. He was walking on water. He was seeing capacity. He was seeing capacity beyond himself. He was seeing how the seemingly impossible is possible. And mind you, this whole time the wind has been present, because the passage told us earlier on in verse 24 that the boat was moving against the wind. It was buffeted in the wave because of the wind. So the wind has always been present. So why did it then become an issue? Why didn't it become an issue when Peter stepped out of the boat and started walking on water, but then eventually became an issue? It's all about his view. When his view was focused on Jesus, he was responding to that. He was responding to what he saw Jesus doing, and he was walking on water. But for whatever reason, when his view shifted, when his view was focused on the wind, which has always been there, he started responding to the wind. Last week I talked about perspective. So I guess perspective plays a role here too. But it's more than perspective though. It's focused on Jesus versus focused on other things. Is focused on the creator versus focus on the created. Is focused on who made the wind versus focusing on the wind. And I'm not gonna fault Peter here, because at least he stepped out of the boat. I know many times when I know I should step out of the boat, but I don't, because the wind is a constant reality to me, because all I can see is the wind. I don't even think of the possibility of stepping out of the boat, much less asking for permission to step out of the boat. And I can imagine that it might be the same for you too. Because in this life, the wind is ever present. There's so many things at different points competing for our attention and taking our attention, so that Jesus is no longer in focus, and those things take the place of God, take the place of Christ, because they have captured our attention, and they have captured our affection. You know, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, where your heart is, where your treasure is, there also your heart will be. And so I think that there is plenty at any given point in time that vouch for our attention, that nudges us to shift our focus away from God and give that focus, that thing that is supposed to belong to God, that is supposed to belong with God, we take it away and we shift it towards them. Whether it's circumstance, whether it's people, whether it's events, whether it's our desires, whether it's ourselves, whether it's our thoughts, and the list goes on and on and on. But what they all have in common is that they want us. It's like a suitor that is vying for your attention and affection. And every now and then, we actually shift our affection from the creator to the created. And every time we do that, every time I do that in my life, it doesn't ever end well. At the end of the day, all that it does for me is bring fear, bring confusion, bring anxiety, bring sleeplessness. And then as I start feeling these things, it pushes me more to even invest in more of it. I hear somebody's opinion or somebody's thoughts, and somehow it affects me. And then rather than looking to God or looking to the Bible for answers, I then start Googling and start looking for other people's opinion and more opinions until I'm now overwhelmed and confused and afraid. In the midst of all this noise, in the midst of all these things that have captured my attention, there is no room for God. So I am inclined to submit to you that a lot of times when we find ourselves in that place where we just can't move forward, where it's like everything is just a dead end, a lot of times those things that we're trying to move forward in, those things that we're trying to push forward, are just the very same things that have occupied our thoughts, our attention, and have shifted it away so that God is no longer in focus, and those things have just taken the place of God, and they have all of our focus, they have all of our attention and all of our affection. And it's so ironic because our knee-jerk reaction is to continue to pour more and more into those things, is to continue to fight more, to push forward, to push our agenda forward, and to continue to, if we just tried harder, if we just did more and did more and did more, we just continue to feed into it. But the counterintuitive thing to do, but the hardest thing to do in those moments, is to let go of our fixation on those things and fix our eyes on God and fix our eyes on Christ. And so I believe that sometimes when we come against these roadblocks, it's a ripe opportunity for us to reconnect with our Creator. Is a time for us to step back and consider, what has my attention? What has my affection? I heard a story some years ago that is a really good illustration for what I'm talking about today. I was talking to this one girl. She's from Nigeria, and she was telling me how she came to study in America. She was not trying to pass in a sermon or whatnot. She was just telling me her life story, but somehow her life story was so impactful to me. So she told me she wanted to come to America. She wanted to study abroad, but she realized that it would be such an uphill task getting a visa to come to study abroad. And even if she got a visa, she doesn't have the finances, the resources to use to pay for school. And so that's when she met somebody who happened to be a coach. He coaches athletes. And so the guy was telling her that if she was an athlete, she could possibly get a scholarship to study abroad, get a scholarship to go to university in the US. But she doesn't play any type of sports whatsoever, and she has no interest whatsoever in sports. But the guy offered to coach her, and she told me her travels with being coached. The guy coaches runners, so he was coaching her to learn to run, to become a runner. And one thing that stood out to me though is she was telling me about when she had to represent her state, when she had to do a race that would determine who would represent her state. And on that day, she didn't want to go for that race because in her mind, she'd already decided that she wasn't any good. She wasn't good at this. She wasn't going to be able to do well. If she tried to compete, it was just going to be a joke. And so she wasn't going to go. But her coach wouldn't let up. So he went to her house that morning and it motivated her to actually show up that day for the race. And so she was telling me that, when the race started, she's running, her coach is running alongside her because she just so happened to be on the track that was closest to the sideline. So he's running on the sideline along her the whole time that she's running. And she was telling me that's all she was aware of. She was just aware of him running beside her and coaching her the whole time and just encouraging her. And all she could hear was his voice. She was not even aware of all the other people running with her in their lanes. She wasn't aware of people cheering in the crowd. All she could hear was just his voice and his footsteps as he was stomping on with her. And then eventually she got to the finish line and she looked around and there was nobody, and she was wondering, where did everybody go? She didn't realize that this whole time she was so oblivious of anything else that she had zoomed straight to the finish line where everybody else hadn't even arrived. So it took other people that she was on the race with some time to actually get to the finish line. Now, this is somebody that didn't even think she had what it took to compete. Now she's getting there far ahead of others. And the whole time she was just focused, focusing and following the prompting of her coach. And like I said, this girl is just telling me her life story. But in that moment, she was preaching to me without actually realizing it. And as I recall that story today, I wonder what my Christian life would be like. I wonder what my race as I continue on this journey would look like if I just shut out all the outside noise and just focused on the voice of my coach, or my companion, the Holy Spirit. If I just focused on the voice of Jesus through scripture. I wonder what this journey would look like if God's voice was the loudest in my ears and the realest of all my realities. Think about that for a minute. So whatever your circumstances, whether you've come to a roadblock and you're not able to move forward, or you just have a lot of confusion, a lot of fears, and just so many things just going on that you're overwhelmed, you don't know how to move forward, this is a good time to step back and ask yourself, where is my attention? Where is my affection? If you can truthfully answer these questions, they might just be the answer you need to move forward. This concludes our series on how God uses circumstances when we are out of move to make his move. And I know today I was asking you to evaluate yourself, evaluate different aspects of your life, and to see what has your attention and what has your affection in the different aspects of your lives. And as you ponder this question, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear some of the things that you come up with, and I want to hear how you plan to move forward, or how you're moving forward as you ponder these questions and you get the answers for yourself. So please be sure to leave me a comment and let me know. And in fact, this question is so loaded, I feel like. So I'm actually going to give it some considerable thought and some considerable exploration. So that's going to be the topic of my next series. I hope you join me again next week and the week after as we explore this topic. And as always, please be sure to share these videos with others. And if you have not done so, subscribe to this channel. And I hope to see you again next week for more Bible-based insights and inspirations to help you thrive. Thank you.